Have you ever stopped to imagine that money might have consciousness? That it isn't just a number, a paper bill or a metal coin, but a silent presence that watches, reacts, and responds to the way you treat it? This idea, which many would call fantasy, was the most daring revelation of a woman who lived more than a century ago and still defies time itself, Florence Scovel Shinn. While the world was rebuilding itself from the ruins of the First World War, another war was being fought inside people's minds, the war of scarcity. Men were losing their jobs, banks were closing their doors, and despair spread like an invisible plague. But in the midst of that dark landscape, a woman's voice echoed, soft yet firm. Florence declared that lack was an illusion, that behind chaos there was a silent spiritual law waiting to be remembered, and that money was not an enemy but a mirror, a reflection of the vibration each human being emits. Welcome to the Code of Wealth. You are now part of a select group representing less than 1% of people on Earth. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss a single revelation, because every revelation here is a key, and each key opens a door within you. Florence wasn't speaking about finances. She was speaking about energy. She affirmed that before money changes hands, it changes frequency, and that frequency is born inside each one of us, in the way we think, feel, and speak about it. In her lectures and books, Florence often repeated, "Money is a faithful servant. It only obeys those who treat it with respect." Simple words, but they sounded like a spell to a generation trained to live in scarcity. For her, true poverty didn't lie in the absence of resources, but in the belief that one is unworthy of receiving them. And that belief silently repels the flow of abundance. She observed that most people treated money as an enemy. Some feared it, believing it corrupted. Others chased it desperately, as if hunting a shadow. Very few treated it as an ally. And that, she said, was the secret, to treat money as a living presence, worthy of respect, recognition, and love. Florence taught that every thought and every word directed toward money are spiritual seeds. Complaining about lack is like planting a desert. Gratitude is planting a garden. And the more you give thanks, the more your garden blooms. She never promised instant miracles, but she guaranteed one thing: inevitable change. Life's energy is obedient, she said. What you bless multiplies. And if right now money were listening to you, what would it hear? That was the question Florence left echoing in her students' minds. And it was from that silence that transformation began. Florence used to say that money behaves like a mirror. It reflects precisely how you see it. If you see it as a threat, it hides. If you honor it as an ally, it draws near. This vision completely transformed the life of Margaret, a humble seamstress who lived in a small neighborhood of New York. She spent her days between needles and fabrics, sewing dreams for other people, while secretly believing she would never have enough. Every time she opened her wallet and saw only a few coins, she would repeat the sentence that had haunted her since childhood. Money never stays with me. It was an unconscious decree, a spell of scarcity that repeated itself without resistance. When she first heard Florence speak, Margaret found the idea absurd. Talk to money, thank it. It sounded like a joke. But the serenity in Florence's voice disarmed her. There was something there, a silent magnetism, a certainty that could not be explained, only felt. That night, Margaret decided to try. She took the coins she had, placed them on the table, and whispered softly, "You are my friends. Thank you for being with me. Bring more of your family to visit." She smiled to herself, a little embarrassed, but felt something change, as if a small flame had been lit inside her. In the following days, she repeated the ritual sincerely. She stopped complaining and began blessing every note that came in and every coin that went out. And what seemed like a symbolic gesture began to produce real results. A few weeks later, a client recommended her work to an upscale clothing store downtown. Within a month, her income had tripled. Margaret could hardly believe it. When she told Florence what had happened, Florence simply said, "Don't be surprised when the invisible responds. It always does, but only when you change the tone of your inner voice." To Florence, the secret wasn't in the money itself, but in the vibrational field each person creates around them. She compared the mind to a spiritual garden. Words are the seeds, emotions are the water, and money is the fruit. If the soil is poisoned by fear and guilt, nothing grows. But if it is watered with confidence and gratitude, Growth is inevitable, and this is what happened to dozens of women who began following her teachings. Sarah, for instance, a young widow struggling to raise 2 children alone, came to Florence in tears. She said the world had shut its doors and she could see no way out. Florence, with her calm and penetrating gaze, replied, "Speak to money as if it were your protector. Welcome it as you would a friend who wishes to care for you and your children." Sarah, desperate, decided to obey. Every morning she would say aloud, "Money, I welcome you with love. I know you desire my good and the good of my family." A few weeks later, distant relatives she barely knew sent her unexpected help. Soon after, she found a stable job. Her life, which had seemed like ruin, began to blossom again. These stories spread like quiet sparks. Ordinary women, housewives, seamstresses, teachers, all reporting inexplicable transformations. And Florence only smiled. To her, none of it was supernatural. It was simply the spiritual law of return, the exact reflection of the energy each woman had begun to emit. Money is neutral, Florence explained. It becomes a blessing or a curse depending on the energy with which you treat it. And what if, all your life, money had never been your enemy, but had always been waiting to be your friend? Florence said that our relationship with money is revealed not only when it arrives, but mainly when it leaves. It is in that moment, when fear, attachment, or regret appear, that scarcity shows its true face. She observed that most people curse their money precisely when they send it out into the world. They pay bills complaining, hand over notes with resentment, and in doing so send a silent command: do not return. To Florence, that was like treating a dear friend with coldness at the door. The result was inevitable: distance. Money has memory, she would say. It remembers how it was treated. If you dismiss it in fear, it will not return. Say if you send it with gratitude, it comes back multiplied. This truth changed the life of Rosa, the owner of a small grocery store. She lived under the same weight as many women of her time, bills piling up, sales dropping, and an invisible sadness hovering in the air. Every night she would close the till, count her coins, and murmur, "There's never anything left." Without realizing it, she was weaving a charm of lack that renewed itself day after day. But one evening, after hearing Florence speak in a small church hall, something shifted inside her. A phrase burned into her mind like gold light: "Money is like the wind, it must move to breathe." That night, Rosa decided to act differently. When she went to pay an old debt, she held the bills for a moment, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for serving me. Go and return multiplied. Wherever you travel, may you flourish, and bring flowers back to me." She expected nothing, did it out of faith, perhaps curiosity. Yet within weeks, something curious began to happen. Customers who had vanished months before reappeared. New ones arrived from nowhere. For the first time in years, Rosa felt joy in opening her cash drawer. When she told Florence, the teacher only smiled and said, "You merely cleared the channel." The flow was always there. It only waited for trust. To Florence, every payment could become an act of liberation. She believed money carried a living impulse that absorbed the emotion given to it. To pay in anger was to throw stones into one's own river. To pay in gratitude was to cast seeds into the current. So sooner or later, those seeds would drift back, transformed into harvest. She taught that money never disappears, it transforms. When sent out in love, it carries a vibration that touches people, situations, and opportunities ready to respond. She called it the law of the circle, the inevitable movement of what is blessed. "Nothing blessed is ever lost," she said. "Everything blessed finds its way home." Florence turned the act of paying bills into a sacred exercise. She advised her students, "Before you hand over the money, breathe deeply and say, 'I send you with joy. May this amount bless whoever receives it, and return to me multiplied in harmony and divine justice.'" Women who practiced it began to witness subtle but powerful changes. Some said their debts felt lighter. Others noticed people around them becoming more generous. And little by little, the same money that once seemed to flee began to flow naturally. Florence explained that money is a messenger, not a prisoner. If you hold it captive with fear, it revolts. If you send it forth with love, it returns bringing friends. What if the next time you pay a bill, instead of complaining, you simply said, "Thank you"? Rosa not only paid her debts, she transformed her energy. Her modest shop prospered, but more than that, she felt light, something no coin could buy, the peace of being aligned with the flow. Watching such transformations, Florence realized an even deeper truth. Money, she said, was never the goal. It was the mirror of the soul. Every material relationship reflected a spiritual one. To bless money was to bless oneself. To curse money was to curse one's own life. It was then that she began teaching something bolder, the invocation. Not merely letting money go with gratitude, but calling it back with dignity, as one would invite a loyal friend to return. And that is what you will discover in the next chapter, how Florence taught her students to invoke money with words of power, transforming scarcity into a field of radiant abundance. Florence often said that abundance is not something to be pursued, it is something to be invited. Chasing money in desperation, she explained, was like running after the wind. The harder you chase, the faster it flees. But inviting it with respect, calling it by name, with calm assurance, is to awaken a law far older than economics, the law of spiritual correspondence. In one of her gatherings in 1924, Florence taught a group of women gathered in a modest living room in New York. The city outside trembled with post-war uncertainty, but in that room, something sacred pulsed. She looked at each of them and said softly, "You must learn to call money as you would call a trusted friend, not with fear, not with arrogance, but with dignity and love." Then she wrote on the chalkboard, "Money, you are welcome in my life. I receive you as a divine blessing. Enter my home with joy. Remain in harmony and multiply in goodness wherever you go." Those simple words became a mantra that spread through letters and whispers across states. Women repeated them every morning and every night. Some held a single coin while doing so. Others placed their hands over empty purses, trusting that invisible hands were already at work. One of those women was Carmen, a young teacher who came from a lineage of scarcity. In her family, phrases like, "Money isn't for people like us," or "We must be content with little," echoed through generations like family prayers. Carmen had accepted that destiny until she heard Florence speak. That evening she went home and stood before the mirror. Her voice trembled as she said, "Money, you are my ally. You are the language through which God blesses my life. I invite you to stay, to circulate, to serve, and to return multiplied." At first it felt mechanical, almost foolish. But she persisted. Each repetition softened her fear, like sunlight dissolving ice. After a few weeks, something miraculous happened. She received a scholarship she hadn't even applied for, one that allowed her to study abroad. It seemed impossible, but Florence would have said it was simply the law of correspondence responding to a new vibration. When you speak with faith, Florence explained, you command the invisible. When you speak with doubt, you scatter it. From that point on, Carmen became one of her most dedicated students. She shared the invocation wherever she went, in classrooms, in letters, in quiet conversations with women who had lost hope. And the pattern repeated. Every time someone truly embraced the invocation, doors opened, debts vanished, opportunities multiplied. Florence never saw this as mere coincidence. She believed that every word carries a vibration that shapes the material world. To her, speaking with money was not superstition, it was spiritual physics. The mind, she said, is a divine instrument. Speak to it as you would to a child and it will obey. Imagine saying to money not "I need you, but you are welcome." How different would your energy feel? To Florence, the difference between lack and prosperity was the tone of one's inner conversation. People of scarcity spoke to money with fear. People of abundance spoke to it with peace. She reminded her students that even their smallest thoughts were magnetic currents shaping reality. So she taught them to transform every interaction into a sacred act. When receiving, to say, "Thank you." When spending, to say, "Bless you." And when calling, to say, "I welcome you." With time, Florence's gatherings grew. She no longer spoke only to women. Men began to attend as well. Businessmen, writers, pastors, even skeptics who came out of curiosity, but left in reverent silence. She stood before them with calm authority and said, "Money is the servant of divine order. When you align with that order, wealth flows as naturally as the tide." Carmen, now transformed by her experience, stood beside her one day and declared to a full audience, "I used to chase money as if it were running from me. Now I simply open the doors and it walks in." Florence smiled. That was the proof she sought, not blind belief, but living evidence. Her message spread beyond her lifetime, carried in books, letters, and testimonies. And although decades have passed, Her voice seems to whisper through time. Speak to money as you would to God, with reverence but without fear. For Florence, invoking prosperity was not about greed. It was about reconciliation. She wanted people to make peace with the energy that had been misunderstood for centuries. To her, every note, every coin, every transaction was a sacred exchange between the human and the divine. When treated with love, money became what it had always meant to be, a vessel of blessings. The invocation was never about calling wealth for selfish gain. It was about restoring balance. When one person reconciles with the flow of abundance, Florence said, a vibration of harmony ripples across the collective. That is why she urged her students to share their testimonies, so that one voice of faith could awaken another. Each time you speak love into money, she said, you heal not only your life, but the lives connected to yours. Florence believed that money is not created in banks but in minds, that every coin, every opportunity and every door that opens begins first as a thought, a vibration silently shaped by belief. She would tell her students, your outer world is your inner world made visible. If you wish to change what you see, change what you say and what you feel. To many, this sounded poetic, but to those who practiced it, it became law. She explained that the subconscious mind is like a faithful servant, always listening, never judging. Whatever command it receives, it fulfills. When you constantly say, I can't afford it, the mind obeys and creates circumstances that confirm that statement. But when you declare with conviction, money flows easily and freely into my life, the same law responds, and doors open where there were once walls. For Florence, there were no coincidences, only correspondences. The energy you emit, whether of fear or faith, always finds its reflection in the material world. That is why she often said that money is a mirror of self-worth. If you see yourself as undeserving, you unconsciously repel prosperity. If you see yourself as worthy, you naturally magnetize it. Money goes where it is loved, she said, and flees where it is feared. These were not mere words. They were lived truths. Among her many students was Evelyn, a single mother who carried deep guilt about money. She had grown up hearing that wealth was selfish and spiritual people should not care about material things. As an adult, she earned well but always lost it just as fast, as if something inside her resisted keeping abundance. One evening after a lecture, she confessed her struggle to Florence. Florence listened quietly, then asked, when you think of money, what image comes to your mind? Evelyn hesitated, then answered, I see a golden light, but it fades, as if it doesn't belong to me. Florence smiled gently. Then that is what must be healed, she said. Money belongs to no one, and to everyone. It flows to where it feels welcome. Begin by saying, I am worthy of divine supply. Money loves to stay with me because I treat it with honor. Repeat that until the light no longer fades. Evelyn began this practice daily, combining it with the invocation she had learned earlier. In less than 2 months, she received a promotion and found herself saving money for the first time in her life. But more importantly, she felt peace in that quiet, unshakable peace of someone who has finally stopped fighting against her own good. Florence explained that such results were not miracles, but the natural outcome of alignment. She said, you cannot attract what you secretly despise. The moment you forgive money for what you believed it did to you, and forgive yourself for believing you were unworthy, the gates open. Have you ever considered that money might not be avoiding you, but simply waiting for your permission to return? This idea was revolutionary. It turned the act of earning and spending into a spiritual dialogue, a mirror reflecting one's own consciousness. When a student learned to see money not as a test, but as a teacher, her entire life began to shift. Florence would say that every experience with money, a bill, a gift, a paycheck, it is a conversation with the divine. Each one asks the same question. Do you trust the source that sustains all things? To those who answered yes, life became lighter. To those who still doubted, she offered compassion, saying, faith must be practiced like music. Each note you play in gratitude tunes your heart to the song of abundance. She taught that scarcity was not a condition, but a belief system, a collective hypnosis passed down through generations. Breaking it required not logic but language, to speak abundance even when there was none visible, to bless a wallet even when it seemed empty, to smile at a bill and say, you are proof that life flows through me. Students who practiced these teachings noticed something subtle. They no longer feared money. They no longer chased it or clung to it. They had learned to coexist with it, naturally, serenely, as one lives with sunlight. And then Florence would bring them to the deepest point of her philosophy. Money was only the surface. Beneath it lay something far greater, the design of divine order, the invisible architecture of life that is always abundant, always giving. When you align with that design, she said, everything else aligns with you. By then, many of her followers had transformed their lives beyond recognition. Not only had they paid debts and gained stability, they had discovered a new identity. They no longer saw themselves as victims of fate, but as participants in a sacred exchange between spirit and matter. Florence often ended her classes by asking them to place a hand over their heart and another over their wallet, and say, I honor the divine flow that passes through me. I am both the giver and the receiver of prosperity. She would then remain silent for a moment, letting the vibration of those words settle in the air, a soft echo that lingered even after everyone left the room. It was in that silence, she said, that the true transformation occurred. Florence often said that every teaching she shared could be condensed into one simple truth. Life responds to the tone of your soul. Money was only the messenger of that tone, the reflection of how much light, faith and respect one carried inside. To her, abundance was never just about having. It was about being in harmony with the invisible law that governs all creation. As her students' lives transformed, Florence began to notice another phenomenon. When one person changed their relationship with money, those around them also began to change. Husbands found new jobs, children developed creative ideas, neighbors started small businesses. Prosperity seemed to spread like fragrance, touching anyone within reach. One enlightened mind, she said, is enough to illuminate an entire household. This, she explained, was the essence of the circle of abundance. No blessing ever ends with the one who receives it. It must continue its journey, expanding outward, returning richer and fuller. When gratitude becomes habit, the circle stays unbroken, and that is when true wealth begins to feel effortless. Florence encouraged her followers to share their stories publicly, not to boast but to multiply faith. Every testimony, she said, becomes a spark that ignites another flame. And when thousands of such sparks unite, darkness itself begins to vanish. One evening, during one of her last gatherings, she stood before a crowd holding a single coin. Her voice was calm, her presence luminous. This, she said, raising it gently, is not money. It is a thought made visible. It carries your trust, your fear, your gratitude, your indifference. If you bless it, it blesses you. If you curse it, it obeys that curse. Treat it as sacred, and it will become a sacred servant. The room was silent. Then she added softly, abundance is not what you possess, and it is what you express. From that day on, many of her students began to see every act of giving and receiving as a ritual of light. Paying for food became an offering. Earning money became an answer from the universe. Even simple acts, tipping someone, donating, buying a gift, turned into spiritual gestures. Florence's teachings had reached their summit, the unity of matter and spirit. She revealed that prosperity is not a competition, but a communion. To wish others wealth is to expand one's own. To rejoice in another's success is to prepare one's own harvest. The universe, she said, mirrors generosity. What would happen if instead of comparing yourself, you blessed the wealth you see in others, trusting that it confirms the same abundance waiting for you? Florence believed that such blessings create invisible bridges between souls, channels through which divine supply circulates freely. And in that circulation lies the proof that we are all connected, all sustained by the same source. She warned her listeners never to reduce prosperity to numbers. If you only count money, she said, you will miss the wealth of the heart, peace, time, friendship, purpose. These are the currencies of heaven, and they multiply as you give them. Her final writings were filled with this vision of wholeness. She urged people to cultivate the wealth of consciousness, the awareness that everything one needs is already within reach, not to be begged for, but to be recognized. Heaven, she wrote, is a state of agreement between thought and truth. Even in her final days, she continued to write letters to her students, reminding them that no prayer is ever lost and no act of gratitude ever goes unanswered. She ended one of those letters with the words, bless what you have and it will increase. Bless what you desire and it will approach. Bless those who prosper, and you will join their company. After her passing, many of her students reported inexplicable experiences, unexpected financial blessings, reconciliations, healings, opportunities arriving at perfect timing. They believed Florence's spirit still worked among them, guiding them through the invisible network of abundance she had taught them to see. And perhaps they were right. For even now, a century later, her words continue to awaken hearts and rewire destinies. Every time someone chooses gratitude over fear, every time someone blesses money instead of cursing it, the circle of abundance expands, and Florence's voice echoes once more through time. You are not chasing money. You are remembering who you are, a vessel of divine flow, a channel through which heaven becomes visible. As this final truth settles, remember, abundance does not begin in the bank, the job, or the market. It begins the moment you decide to treat life as sacred, to speak with reverence, to act with faith, to bless with love. That is where the real wealth resides, not in possession, but in vibration. So now, as you close your eyes and feel these words, imagine the flow surrounding you, light moving like gold dust, circling endlessly, touching everything you are and everything you love. It listens, it responds, it multiplies. Because the moment you speak to money as to a friend, you awaken the same force Florence discovered long ago, the living current of abundance that has never left you. And when you open your eyes, let that realization guide every gesture, every thought, every exchange. You are no longer waiting for prosperity. You are already within it.